Hello, I've gotten some questions recently on how I like to shade my ears, so I figured I'd just make a quick video explaining how I do it so that everybody can have access to it. um, this is just the way I do it, it's my method. However, there are plenty of other ways to do it, and I advise you do whatever works best for you because everybody has their own unique workflow. So you can take bits and pieces from this as you like, and no need to follow the entire method to a T. So, I like to start off with my character in a shadowless room so that none of the shadows from IMVU's lighting engine affect my actual shading. I also like to start off with a completely blank avatar, no hair, no nothing, just kind of bare bones, just so I can see everything a little bit better. For further clarity, I like to add some black opacity maps to all the accessories, piercings, tufts, horns, anything that will get in the way of viewing the actual ear. So let me just do that real quick. I like to use a smaller file size to decrease the chance of bloating. The higher resolution image you use, the more KBs the item tends to have in the end when you upload it. So let's say if I have a 512 pixel by 512 pixel image for every single one of these, even if they're not in use, it's going to be higher KBs than if I just use the 6x6. So I like to keep it cute. Just keep it minimal. After getting the mesh nice and clean, I like to go into my Photoshop. I personally use Photoshop, but any art editing program will work. So I like to select the wire map, right-click, go invert, and modify, expand by 2 pixels. That makes it so the selection is just barely off where the actual map is. This ensures that any shading we do in the future will fully encapsulate every visible area on the map. I then like to use my little bucket tool, fill that in, just so it's easier to grab those pieces when I need them individually. Just bloop, 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 bloop. Another way to do that, if you're unable to use the expansion tool to expand the selection, is you select, invert like normal, use the bucket tool again to, on a new layer, use the bucket tool, and then just copy, and then go up by 2 pixels, copy, go down by 2 pixels. I usually like to merge them at this point. Copy, go to the side by 2 pixels, and then copy, go to the other side by 2 pixels. That'll give a similar result. It'll be a little bit choppier. There'll be some holes and stuff, but they should be far enough out to where it won't affect it. So that should give you a good baseline to work off of as well. I prefer this method as it's quicker, but both of them work. They're functionally the same. I then like to identify where on the map the inner ear is. On this map, it's right here. So I like to make a new layer, select that, and make it a nice neutral pink so that you can tell what's going on. Both the inner and the outer ear have different colors, so it's a little bit easier to tell what's going on. Now that I have all of my different parts located and easy to select, I usually start with the back of the ear. I use my select tool to grab that first section that we made and create a new layer, and with a soft fuzzy brush and black, I just like to start coloring within that selection. The back of the ears tend to need a lot more of like a deep fade kind of gradient towards the back there. And after any significant change, I like to export and then just do a little check. Let's see what the back of the ear looks like. Okay, that looks pretty good. I would add maybe a little bit more shading towards the bottom here, just to make it look a little bit more fuzzy, even gradient. And there we go. That's looking pretty nice. So that's it for the shading on the back of the ear. We'll get to the highlights later. As for the front of the ear, there's this section right up here. These little ridges tend to be a little bit more difficult to handle and to texture than this big back panel here. So what I like to do is the same thing is just start with a big fuzzy brush and get this big general like wide area shaded in, and then as you go along, reduce the size of your brush to get into those little areas nice and tight and make sure the shading is even. You want to make sure the gradient like goes in smoothly so there's no harsh edges or like any obvious lines where the shading has been like dissected. So once I have one side done, I'll usually make another layer and do the other side separately, just so it's easier to go back and make small changes. If you do it all on the same area, then you're gonna have to like precisely weave your eraser brush in between these areas, and it just honestly gets to be a pain in the butt. So I like to do two separate little areas with that. And then I'll go in with my eraser tool and clean it up a little bit more. Make sure that the two sides aren't touching very much so that it has a nice even kind of spread. If they're touching, it can oftentimes just make the texture overall a little bit too dark, and it won't let the highlights show as much when we do add them. So just keep on adjusting it. All right, so this is looking pretty good. I like to check near the seams to make sure that there isn't any harsh lines. When you go over and highlight it like this, you can see that there's a little bit of a seam right over here. So in order to fix that, I'll go back into this area. And so that is right here, this general area is where it is. So I'll just add a little bit more shading to this layer in the area where there was a seam. All right, that seam has pretty much disappeared entirely just from that small little edit. So we're looking good. After that, I like to group these layers and set them to overlay and put the opacity to 60%. Whatever opacity you want to use is up to your discretion. I use 60% because it's the amount of contrast that I like. I adjust it sometimes based off of the lightness of the color. If it's a light color, sometimes it'll need darker shading. If it's a dark color, sometimes it'll need lighter shading. It's very situational. So just use whatever you think looks best. I like to keep the inner shading separate from the outer shading. So I'll select this and start just doing what we were doing before. Add that black on a new layer and blur it out. Yep, I think that's looking pretty all right. For the center of the ear, I pretty much like to just use my select tool and grab a little portion here and make a hard edge with that line that we just selected, and then use my fuzzy brush again to make that little crease in the center. So that looks pretty nice. I like to put that on overlay and also put that on 60% just to match the others. And you can group that. That's the inner ear and the outer ear. If you want, you can clean it up by selecting the outside and clearing that up. I honestly don't do that all the time, only when people are going to open my files. So after all of the shadows are done, you still need to do all of the highlights. So for the back of the ear, I like to do this little kind of ring situation, just like a little something like that, usually a shape like that. I think it looks nice, but it's definitely not everybody's style. I see most commonly people use either one shadow or one highlight straight down the middle or two highlights on either side. I like a little ring highlight because I think it's cute and it makes it look squishy, but since that's kind of like situational, I'll just show what most people do. So you get your two little highlights here and you draw them in white. in the positions where you would want the highlights to be. I like to double check my positioning before going further with this step, just to make sure that they're in the right spots. I'd say they need to be a little bit more rounded out, so I'm going to redraw these, but a little rounder and fuller. Yeah, I think that's good. And then I'll use my eraser tool to adjust these a little bit. Make sure they line up pretty much perfectly. There we go. And then what I like to do is hide both of these layers, create a new layer by copying it, and then I start blurring it out. I get a large blur brush and I just kind of smudge it all out. Then I like to copy that layer and use my Gaussian blur to make it even smoother. And then I like to have another highlight layer and, oops, wrong brush, and smudge it out, but just a little bit. So not as much as this one, just a little bit. And then I'll adjust the opacities so that it has sort of like a smooth gradation from that kind of harsher center highlight to a smooth, fluffy outer area. That way it gives more dimension to the highlight. And then with the last layer, I use my erase tool in a large fluffy brush to mark where I want the little shines to be. I like to add little shines to my highlights. So when that's all done, you select all of the layers and apply them as overlay. So that's that first bottom highlight. Looking pretty good. I like to select all these layers and put them in a group when I know that I'm done with them. And same thing goes for here. So I have this one left, I copy it, hide the original layer, and we just go through those steps. Blur it up, copy it, Gaussian blur, copy the original one again, and blur slightly, like that. And then adjust the opacity. So this one, I'll try to make it match. So the general large highlight behind is 100%. This one was set to 52%, so I'll try to get that to 52%. Then this one over here is set to 13%, so I'll put that one to 13% as well, just so that they match up perfectly. All right, and then with this shine over here, using the eraser tool, I like to stagger my little highlight shines a little bit so that they're not exactly in the same place as the other one. If they're too symmetrical, sometimes I find that it looks a little weird, but that's just my opinion. You could do it however you want. You don't even have to include the shines if you don't like them. Select all again, put it to overlay, group the layers, and then you have the highlights on the back. Boom. You can obviously just do one down the center if you think that looks best. Each ear I feel is different, needs different amounts of highlight, I guess. You can also adjust your highlight like this, rotating it and using the distort tool or the skew tool to make it wider at the base if you didn't like the way it was structured before. So sometimes I'll do that. I think it looks fine though, so I'll keep it how it is. So I'm just going to group both of these highlights together as they're part of the same one. It's all in the back. So then I can easily edit each piece if I ever want to. Then for the inner ear, or not the inner ear, but the ridge of the ear, I kind of like to very loosely draw in the shape of what the little area is. And then I'll use my warp tool to get it perfect, because it's a lot quicker and a lot easier to use the warp tool to make small adjustments rather than fighting for your life by making every line perfect. I don't really like redoing lines over and over and over again. It ends up just looking the same anyway, so functionally they're very similar. I'd say if there's a way to do something easier, I think everybody should always do that. If there's a tool you can use to make your life easier, obviously, go for it. That's good. So since this one kind of lost some of its density due to all of the like warping and all that stuff, I like to copy it and adjust it a little bit so that it matches the same like kind of thickness and opacity as the other side. This side at the very tip is looking a little bit thin, so I might go over it a little bit just to kind of even it out and make it the same width as the rest of it. All right, merge these layers and the same process as before. And it's looking nice and juicy and nice and glossy. I'm liking it. I'm liking it. The same steps we're just going to repeat for the inner ear as well. So make this sort of shape in the middle. Try to follow along the edges over here. And then warp it to where exactly you want it. Maybe right over here would be good. Double check the positioning. I'd say that looks right. And then now that everything is, all the highlights are together, I like to move these highlights down with the general ear, these two general ear highlights. And then I'll make a group of these, so then you have everything where you need it to be. And then these ones are up top. So you can easily adjust for everything. You can adjust the shadows separately. You can adjust the inner ear separately, of course. And there you go. That's how I personally shade my ears. I think it comes out pretty nicely most of the time. Sometimes it's a little bit more finicky and you'll have to do a little bit of detail work. Not every map is made the same, so just use your best discretion, as I've been saying. Adjust it to your own stylistic preferences. Take as much as you want from the video. You can use my entire method if you want, or you can just take things from it that you find useful. I hope that you're able to learn something a little bit helpful from this video and apply it to how you create. And I hope you have a nice day. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.